Forbidden islands, rivers that change their course, a giant fungus slowly consuming an entire forest, and even snow in the tropics. It sounds like science fiction, but all of it is real. The US is full of places that seem fictional. Today, we'll prove that reality can be more surprising than myths. Let's open the map and enter the world of the most incredible geographical discoveries. 50 most fascinating facts about US geography. So let's get started. The tallest mountain in the world is not Everest. It's a volcano in America. Sounds unbelievable? It all depends on the point of reference. If we measure height from sea level, Everest is indeed the champion at 29,000 feet. But if we count from base to summit, the true giant is hiding where no one expects it, beneath the waves of the Pacific Ocean. Meet Mauna Kea, a dormant volcano in Hawaii. Above sea level, it rises an impressive 13,800 feet, much taller than Mount Fuji. But that's just the tip. Its total height, including its underwater base, reaches 33,500 feet. That's nearly 1 mile taller than Everest. Fun fact, Mauna Kea is one of the best places on Earth for stargazing. A road to the summit was constructed in 1964, and since then, 13 telescopes have been installed atop the volcano. So Hawaii isn't just about sandy beaches and surfing. In fact, here's something even more surprising. The craziest thing is, it snows in Hawaii. But how is that possible? To witness it, you'll need to wait for winter and reach higher elevations, either Mauna Kea or the state's second highest peak, Mauna Loa. At these altitudes, temperatures can drop to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, in Hawaii. Every winter, these summits are capped with snow, and technically, you could go skiing here, but only in theory. This isn't Aspen. There are no ski trails or lifts. But even snow isn't the most surprising fact about these islands. Thanks to Hawaii, the landmass of the US is continuously expanding. One of the world's most active volcanoes, Kilauea, has been erupting non-stop, spewing lava that cools and forms new land. The massive eruption in 2018 alone added at least 875 acres of new land. And that's not all. Right now, just 18 miles off of the coast, a brand new island called Loehi is forming underwater. It's still hidden beneath the ocean, but pretty soon it will emerge. Well, soon, as in several tens of thousands of years from now. But hey, what's the rush? While Hawaii keeps adding some land, in other parts of the US, it's actually sinking into the ground. How does that work? Here's a striking example. Ellison's Cave in Georgia is home to the deepest vertical pit in the continental US. Take a look. This isn't a light at the end of a tunnel. In fact, it's not even a tunnel, because this hellish thing doesn't go forward. This is a view from below. It's a fantastic pit. In fact, it's the deepest vertical cave in the continental US. By the way, it's actually called the Fantastic Pit, and it plunges 586 feet down. And it's not the only one. Nearby, there's also the Incredible Pit, which reaches 440 feet. These two pits lie on opposite sides of Ellison's Cave, which is over 12 miles long. These bottomless pits are hidden from sight and can't be noticed right away. But how about gorges, whose depth takes your breath away at first glance? Of course, when people think of deep canyons, the Grand Canyon is the first thing that comes to mind. But what if we told you that it's not the deepest canyon in the US? On the border of Idaho and Oregon stretches Hell's Canyon, a fault with a staggering depth of 8,000 feet. That's deeper than the Grand Canyon's 6,000 feet. This hellish marvel was carved over millions of years by the relentless Snake River, slowly cutting through rock to create one of the most awe-inspiring landscapes in North America. But water doesn't just carve through stone, it shapes shorelines and even outlines entire continents. When thinking about the sea and the ocean, California is probably the first state that comes to mind. With its long Pacific coastline, endless beaches, and dramatic cliffs, surely it must have the longest shoreline in the US, right? Surprisingly, no, Maine actually surpasses California in coastline length. That is, if you take into account all the bays, inlets, and islands, officially, California's coastline stretches 3,427 miles. But Maine's rugged, deeply indented shoreline actually stretches for 3,478 miles. Here's an even wilder fact. Alaska has more coastline than all the other US states combined. The state's continental coastline alone spans 6,600 miles. But if you include all the inlets, bays, islands, and curves, that number increases to 33,000 miles. And now, here's another number that will surprise you. One single lake in the US contains 10% of all the surface freshwater on the planet. Lake Superior is an absolute giant, covering 31,700 square miles. It's almost the size of Guatemala. It holds so much water that if you spread it evenly across the entire US, it would create a 4-foot deep layer. Every second, enough water evaporates from here to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And if you wanted to drain the lake, you'd need a Niagara Falls-sized flow running continuously for 190 years. Superior's scale is mind-blowing, but the next lake is just as impressive. It looks like a portal to another world, a perfectly round shape, unreal deep blue water that seems like it has an Instagram filter applied, sheer cliffs, and a mysterious little island rising in the middle of the serene lake. Where is this place? Crater Lake in Oregon. The deepest lake in the US, the depth of the lake is 1,949 feet. This is deeper than the height of the Empire State Building. The water here is so clear that on a sunny day, you can see up to 140 feet down. This lake was formed 7,700 years ago when Mount Mazama erupted with such force that its summit collapsed inward, leaving a massive crater 5 miles in diameter. Over time, rain and snowmelt filled the basin. No rivers flow into it, so the water remains crystal clear, and its blue color seems almost surreal. Okay, this volcanic lake was destined to be extraordinary, but what about a lake hidden underground? Hidden in the heart of Tennessee lies Lost Sea, the largest underground lake in the US. Its official surface is 1.6 hectares, but that's only what has been mapped. Scientists still don't know its full size because the tunnels and flooded caves extend beyond the accessible areas. The water here is still perfectly smooth like a mirror, and the cavern ceilings keep it in eternal twilight. Visitors can take a boat ride beneath the earth, shining a flashlight into the dark depths that haven't seen sunlight for thousands of years. It's one of the most mysterious and enigmatic places in America, where time seems to stand still. Now, imagine a lake like that wasn't supposed to exist at all? Yes, one of the largest lakes in California was formed by mistake. In 1905, engineers attempted to divert the Colorado River to irrigate farmland in Southern California, but they underestimated the power of the river. It broke through the Imperial Valley Dam, and a massive flood began pouring into a vast basin that had once been the floor of an ancient sea. The flow was so strong that water continued to pour in for 2 years. That's how the Salton Sea, California's largest body of water, was born. It's like a real-life natural experiment, behaving unpredictably even today. It expands and shrinks, and its salinity continues to rise. But US lakes don't just appear out of nowhere. Some also disappear without a trace. Death Valley once had a lake larger than Rhode Island. Yes, it's hard to imagine that this place was once covered with water. After all, Death Valley, one of the driest places on Earth, receives less than 2 inches of rainfall per year. The temperature can reach 134 degrees Fahrenheit, one of the highest ever recorded on Earth. But it's true, about 22,000 years ago during the Ice Age, a massive body of water, called Lake Manly, stretched across what is now Death Valley. It was over 100 miles long. Now, only dry land and dazzlingly white salt flats remain here. The water evaporated, leaving behind thick layers of salt, making parts of Death Valley look as if they've been dusted with snow. But once in a while, water actually returns here. Rare rainstorms can fill the low-lying areas, turning the desert into a surreal mirror, but only for a few days, until the last drop evaporates. In some parts of the US, lakes vanish into thin air, leaving behind salt deserts, while in other places, there are so many lakes that it's easy to lose count. Minnesota proudly calls itself the land of 10,000 lakes, but compared to the northernmost US state, that number seems modest. You have no idea just how modest. Alaska has over 3 million lakes. Some of them are so vast that they could completely swallow major American cities. Take Lake Iliamna, for example, the largest freshwater lake in Alaska, which covers an area bigger than Los Angeles. And how do you cross such a massive lake? In Louisiana, they went all in and built something truly spectacular. Imagine driving down a really long highway where all you see around is water. No buildings, no trees, and even no sign of land. At some point, the shoreline vanishes beyond the horizon, and it feels as if the road is floating over the water, stretching straight into the sky. This is the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway, the longest continuous bridge over water in the United States. And it's not just one bridge, but 2 parallel spans, stretching nearly 24 miles across the vast lake. It connects 2 shores of Louisiana and stands as a true engineering marvel. Some drivers start to panic when they reach the middle, and there's a reason for that. The trick is that, because of the Earth's curvature, both ends of the bridge really disappear beyond the horizon. Meanwhile, in another part of the US, something just as mesmerizing is happening. Here, fountains of boiling water erupt from the ground, painting the air with clouds of steam. Yellowstone is a true geyser paradise. The park is home to over 500 geysers, which is 60% of all the geysers on Earth. It's where you'll find Old Faithful, one of the world's most famous geysers. It erupts every 35 to 120 minutes, sending water shooting 184 feet into the air. And then there's Grand Prismatic Spring, the 3rd largest hot spring in the world. Thanks to thermophilic bacteria, it shimmers with breathtaking shades of blue, green, yellow, and red. A real marvel. But the next place will surprise you with actual treasures, literally. You can find real diamonds at Crater of Diamonds State Park in Arkansas. Here, anyone can grab a shovel, dig in the dirt, and possibly become a proud owner of a precious stone. The largest diamond ever discovered here weighed over 40 carats. A regular tourist was just digging around when they stumbled upon a stone later valued at millions of dollars. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? But this is the only diamond deposit in the world open to the public. Imagine this. You go for a casual stroll in the park and walk out as a millionaire. But another US state is famous for something much more out of this world. It's visitors from space. Arizona is home to one of the best preserved meteor craters on Earth. You probably knew that 65 million years ago, a meteor wiped out the dinosaurs. Well, 50,000 years ago, another cosmic visitor crashed into Arizona, leaving behind a giant mark. It also destroyed all life over a vast area along the way. And it left a strikingly pronounced scar on the face of the Earth. This is the Barringer Crater, one of the best preserved meteor craters on Earth. It measures 560 feet deep and 1,200 meters in diameter, a colossal pit big enough to fit an entire skyscraper. Once, a fiery hell raged here because of this giant. But today, the crater serves as a window into the past, offering a glimpse of the catastrophic power of space collisions. Speaking of bridges, sometimes nature builds them all on its own. In Utah's Arches National Park, you'll find the Landscape Arch, the longest natural bridge in the US. Can you believe that wind, rain, and millions of years of erosion sculpted this masterpiece? The arch stretches 290 feet, and it looks as though an invisible sculptor carefully carved it into the rock. But the real question remains, how much longer will it stand? In 1991, several massive chunks broke off the arch. Now, at its thinnest point, it measures just 6 feet, and it seems like at any moment nature could destroy its own ancient creation. The next place is a small but significant man-made creation. A city park the size of a single step? Sounds like a joke, but it's absolutely real. In Portland, Oregon, you'll find Mill Inns Park, officially recognized as the smallest park in the world. Its diameter is only 2 feet. It's a tiny patch of land that can barely fit one flower, a few blades of grass, and maybe a miniature garden gnome. But the park has its own legend. Local journalist Dick Fagan once claimed that a colony of leprechauns lived there. Since then, tiny decorations, signs, and even miniature benches have appeared in the park from time to time. The next landmark is also popular, But this time, it's thanks to its gigantic size. However, it's not so easy to see. What do you think is the largest living organism on Earth? A blue whale? A sequoia? Nope, it's a fungus. The world's largest living organism, a fungus called Armillaria ostoyi, also known as the honey fungus, is hidden within Malheur National Forest in Oregon. It spans an astonishing 3.8 square miles, which is larger than the entire center of New York City. Its mass is estimated at hundreds of tons, and its age is over 2,500 years. But if you're expecting to see a giant mushroom cap, think again. The mushrooms you see in your soup are just the fruiting bodies of fungi. The entire organism, the mycelium, is a vast network of fungal roots underground. Think of it this way. When you eat an apple, you know it's just the fruit, but the actual organism is the apple tree. The same applies here. The organism is almost invisible. It grows underground, and you can only occasionally see small mushrooms appearing on the surface. The fungus slowly wraps its mycelial threads around tree roots, gradually consuming the forest. This massive predator of the fungal world is capable of killing massive trees to continue its silent expansion. Gigantic, invisible, ancient. But fungi aren't the only life forms capable of surviving for millennia. When the Egyptians were building the pyramids, when the Sumerians invented writing, and when Rome and Athens didn't even exist, this tree was already standing. Meet Methuselah, a Great Basin bristlecone pine, one of the oldest living organisms on the planet. It's over 4,800 years old, and it's still alive today. Methuselah grows in the White Mountains of California, in a desolate, windswept landscape where no other tree could survive for so long. And although it stands as a silent witness to millennia, its exact location is kept secret to protect it from vandals. Now let's move to a place where living relics coexist. Their ancestors survived the ice ages and dinosaurs. Alligators and crocodiles are prehistoric predators that once shared the planet with dinosaurs. Today, they almost never meet each other in the wild. Alligators prefer fresh water, while crocodiles are drawn to salty shores. But there is one exception. In the Everglades of Florida, alligators and crocodiles swim side by side, coexisting in a one-of-a-kind ecosystem. And the most surprising part? Despite their similar hunting instincts, they rarely fight each other. The swamps are teeming with life. Lazy manatees float by. The Florida panther is spotted in the brush. And hundreds of rare bird species soar in the sky. Yes, Florida's wildlife is astonishing. But in Ohio, there's something that takes you into the world of fantasy. Have you ever seen a crystal the size of a house? Hidden within Crystal Cave, Ohio, lies the largest geode in the world. For reference, a geode is a cavity inside a rock lined with mineral deposits. Typically, they're about the size of a fist, but not this one. This massive geological capsule is 35 feet in diameter and studded with blue celestine crystals. Some of these crystals are as tall as a person. Stepping inside, you feel like the hero of an adventure movie, surrounded by a world of gemstones. Now let's move from the stillness of crystals to a place where the ground itself is constantly shifting beneath your feet. Remember when we mentioned how Hawaiian Islands are growing? Well, the American archipelago of the Outer Banks also has a constantly changing coastline. These islands stretch across the coast of North Carolina for almost 200 miles. And their shape is constantly changing due to ocean currents, storms, tides, and hurricanes. Because of these natural phenomena, building here is a risky undertaking. Residents here build houses, roads, and piers, but in a few years, all of this can be swallowed up by the ocean. And this isn't the only place where nature reshapes the land. There's an island in Texas that constantly shifts due to the tides. Padre Island in Texas, stretching nearly 130 miles along the coast, is literally drifting. Due to tides, storms, and strong ocean currents, its boundaries constantly shift. Every year the island moves, and hurricanes are capable of tearing entire sections of land and moving them further. In 2005, Hurricane Rita changed the shape of Padre Island, washing away part of the sand dunes into the sea. Additionally, the island is known for having some of the longest untouched beaches in the U.S. Its waters also serve as a critical habitat for the endangered Kemp's Ridley sea turtles. Nature refuses to stay still, and people must constantly battle with its whims. But despite the world's shifting landscapes, there's one thing we know for sure. Earth is a sphere. The curvature of the Earth isn't something you can easily spot, unless you're in space. Near the ocean, you might notice how ships disappear over the horizon, but on land, you can't see such a sight. Or can you? In Utah, there are salt flats where you can notice the curvature of the Earth. If you place a tall object, for example a pole or a mast, and step back far enough, preferably several miles, you'll notice that its base starts to vanish beyond the horizon. However, there are places where something even greater disappears, where the sun itself vanishes from sight. Imagine waking up in the morning, looking out the window, and seeing nothing but complete darkness. A day passes, then two, a week, a month, and the sun never appears. No, this isn't the plot of a sci-fi movie about Earth drifting through space. It just means you found yourself in the northernmost town in the US. In Geographic, Alaska, there's a polar night from mid-November to late January, a period of 67 days without sunlight. Streetlights glow 24/7, schools and shops remain open, but people's biological clocks go haywire. Some feel constantly drowsy, while others lose their sense of time altogether. Here, night isn't just a time of day, it's a whole season. In this town, people lose track of time, but there's a place where time exists, but no one needs it. Time is relative, especially when no one is around to use it. The US has an entire time zone where no one lives. It consists of just two tiny uninhabited islands, Baker Island and Howland Island, which fall under UTC 12, the earliest time zone on Earth. Here, time always lags behind the rest of the world. For example, when it's already tomorrow in Tokyo, Sydney, or London, it's still the early hours of today on Baker and Howland. A time zone with no people is already a weird thing. But what about a desert where it unexpectedly snows? Think deserts mean scorching heat, relentless sun, and burning sand? Not always. It snows in winter in the Great Basin Desert of Nevada. This is the coldest desert in the US, and although temperatures can reach 113 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, in the winter they drop to -22 degrees Fahrenheit. Precipitation is scarce, but due to its high elevation, some areas exceed 9,800 feet above sea level. You may occasionally see raging blizzards instead of dust storms here. NASA even tests Mars rovers here because the climate is so extreme and dry that it closely resembles the Martian surface. Yes, the way air masses move in this region is fascinating. But what about movements in the Earth's crust? Hollywood loves disaster movies about the San Andreas Fault, but this isn't just fiction. The San Andreas Fault is actively shifting California by 2 inches every year. It separates two massive tectonic plates, the Pacific Plate, which holds Los Angeles, and the North American Plate, where San Francisco is located. But these plates aren't stationary. The Pacific Plate is creeping northwest. If this process continues, in 10 million years, Los Angeles and San Francisco will be neighbors. Of course, that's a long wait, but sometimes the fault shifts much faster. In 1906, a San Francisco earthquake moved the land by 20 feet in 1 instant. In another part of the US, however, nature's fury doesn't come from the ground, but from the air. One of the strongest winds on Earth was recorded on Mount Washington in New Hampshire. If you want to experience nature's full fury, this is the place to be. It's often called home of the world's worst weather, and for good reason. In 1934, one of the most powerful wind gusts in history was recorded here. 231 miles per hour. That's stronger than a Category 5 hurricane and even faster than the top speed of a Formula One race car. In fact, hurricane-force winds are common here, and in winter, temperatures can plunge to -49 degrees Fahrenheit, creating brutal conditions. Even seasoned mountaineers claim that climbing Everest in clear weather is easier than surviving a storm on Mount Washington. Now, let's move to another extremely cold place. What's the easternmost state in the US? Florida? Maine? Wrong. It's Alaska. Yes, Alaska. It stretches across both hemispheres of the Earth. But how is that possible? These islands extend so far west that some of them, like Attu Island, cross the 180th meridian. Yes, the very one that separates the western and eastern hemispheres. This creates an incredible geographical paradox. Alaska is simultaneously the westernmost and easternmost territory in the US. Naturally, a place like this deserves a capital that's just as unique. Juneau is the only US state capital that cannot be reached by road. The city is literally trapped between steep mountains and icy fjords, and the nearest highway simply ends at the water's edge. The only way to reach Juneau is by air or sea. Planes fly in regularly and ferries connect the city to other coastal towns. The next city on our journey can technically be reached by land, but getting there won't be easy. Welcome to Point Roberts, an American town cut off from the rest of the country and surrounded by Canada. Imagine living in the US, but having to cross the border twice just to reach your own country. That's the daily reality for residents of Point Roberts, a tiny American town isolated from the rest of the US. How did this happen? It all comes down to the 49th parallel, which defines the border between the US and Canada. Point Roberts is located south of this line, but here's the problem. The rest of Washington state is located north of it. As a result, to get from Point Roberts to Big America, residents first cross the city's border with Canada, drive through its territory, and then cross the Canada-US border again, and only then return to the US. Yes, when a border divides a town, it can be inconvenient. But what if it goes straight through a building? What about a building that exists in two countries at the same time? The Haskell Free Library straddles the border between the US and Canada. It's located in both Vermont, USA and Quebec, Canada, with its structure symbolically split down the middle. The reading room is in Canada, while the bookshelves are in the US. This means that if you're sitting at a table and need a book from the shelf, you'll have to cross the border to get it. But don't worry, no passport is required. The library is considered a neutral zone, where visitors can move freely between countries. A border running through a library is fascinating, but what happens when a border shifts, leaving a town in an entirely different state? The town of Kaskaskia, Illinois, became separated from its state due to a river's changing course. It was once located on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River, but in the 19th century, the river changed its course. Now the city is located on the western bank in Missouri. Despite this, Kaskaskia is still legally part of Illinois. However, the only way to reach it is by boat or by traveling through another state. Here, state borders defy logic. But in the next case, even our common understanding of north and south gets turned upside down. All right, here's a geography question. Which is farther north, Canada or the US? We typically assume that Canada is always north of the US, except for Alaska. But here's a surprising fact. Detroit, USA is actually north of Windsor, Canada. As you can see on a map, to cross the border from Canada into the US, you actually have to travel north. This is one of the rare cases where an American city is located further north than its Canadian neighbor. But the border surprises don't stop there. There's a place in the US where you can step onto British ground. On Ocracoke Island in North Carolina, you'll find the grave of a British sailor, and this small piece of land officially belongs to the United Kingdom. The US transferred it to the British government indefinitely, so now it's kinda a British enclave, though it's only the size of a small cemetery. But the US also owns land in England. In Cambridge, there's the American Military Cemetery, which is officially US territory. Thousands of American soldiers who lost their lives in World War II are buried here. This land was granted to the US permanently. So even thousands of miles away from its border, there's a place that will remain part of America. Now let's return to US territory, on the American continent. It might seem logical that a state's capital should also be its largest and most important city, but things work differently in the US. Only 17 state capitals are the largest cities in their states. The rest are far more tricky. For example, the biggest metropolises in the US, New York City, Los Angeles, and Chicago, are not state capitals. Instead, administrative centers are much less famous cities: Albany in New York, Sacramento in California, and Springfield in Illinois. Why? In some cases, capitals were chosen to balance political power. In others, location convenience played a role, and in some, it simply happened that way historically. This is how the US map was shaped. and some areas ended up right in the middle of it all. Tennessee and Missouri hold a unique record. Each state borders 8 others. Interestingly, they also share a border with each other. Let's take Tennessee. Its borders weave through the U.S. map, touching Kentucky and Virginia to the north, North Carolina to the east, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi to the south, Arkansas and Missouri to the west. The next state may not have as many neighbors, but it has a different claim to fame. Vermont was an independent country for 14 years. While the United States declared independence in 1776, Vermont decided to take its time before joining the Union. In 1777, it declared independence not only from Britain, but also from New York and New Hampshire, both of which claimed its land. For 14 years, Vermont existed as a sovereign country, with its own government, currency, and even army. But in 1791, it finally agreed to become part of the U.S., entering as the 14th state. Borders changed, countries joined the Union, but even names didn't stay the same. Rhode Island officially changed its name in 2020. Before that, its full official name was Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. However, the word plantations evoked unpleasant associations with slavery, and the state's residents decided to get rid of it. In a statewide referendum, the majority of voters supported dropping the word, and the state officially became just Rhode Island. It wasn't as dramatic as Vermont's independence, but it was an important symbolic step in U.S. history. But people can change more than just symbolic things like names. In 1900, Chicago authorities changed the flow of the Chicago River. The reason? The city's wastewater and sewage were flowing straight into Lake Michigan, which was its primary source of drinking water. The solution? A massive system of canals and locks that redirected the river's course. Now the river flows into the Mississippi River instead of the lake. This project saved Chicago from an ecological disaster and became one of the boldest engineering feats in U.S. history. And if Americans can change the course of a river, what's stopping them from moving an entire bridge across the Atlantic? And now, you certainly won't believe what we're about to tell you. The London Bridge was moved to Arizona. And yes, if you thought of Tower Bridge and didn't believe it, great, that's not the one. We're talking about the more modest London Bridge from 1831. Still, the story sounds bizarre. By the mid-20th century, the old London Bridge was falling apart, and residents started considering its replacement. Upon hearing the news, American millionaire Robert McCulloch stepped in. Looking for a way to attract tourists to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, the rich guy simply bought the entire bridge for $2.5 million, had it disassembled stone by stone, shipped it across the Atlantic, and rebuilt it in Arizona. Now the British landmark doesn't stretch over the River Thames. It stands over an artificial canal in the desert, making it one of the most unexpected tourist attractions in the U.S. But if you think London Bridge in the American desert is weird, just wait until you hear about this next place. Nearly all the residents of Whittier, Alaska live in one single building. Imagine this, 200 people living under one roof in Baggage Towers, a 14-story complex that functions as an entire town. Inside, there's a grocery store, post office, school, police station, church, and even a hotel. During the harsh winters, when the only road to town is buried in snow, residents barely need to go outside. Everything they need is right inside their home. It's like a tiny civilization hidden among the mountains. But in the US, there are places where people not only live differently, but have decided to completely isolate themselves. Once upon a time, a California town declared independence, and then changed its mind. Freedom is great, but what if it comes at a cost? In 1850, the residents of Rough and Ready, a small town in California, decided to secede from the US. The reason? They didn't want to pay taxes. The town declared itself the independent Great Republic of Rough and Ready, even creating its own flag and constitution. But soon, they faced a much bigger problem than taxes. 3 months later, some townspeople traveled to Nevada City to buy alcohol for their celebration, but were denied service because they were considered foreigners. Frustrated, they returned home and decided it was time to rejoin the nation. And just like that, Rough and Ready became part of the US again. The next place was also isolated in its own way, but for a slightly different reason. Morgan Island in South Carolina is home to thousands of monkeys, and it's strictly off-limits for humans. Picture this: 4,000 rhesus macaques living in total isolation. No people, no cities, no roads, just endless trees and monkeys jumping from branch to branch. The monkeys were originally brought to the island for medical research, but over time, the entire island became a closed-off wildlife reserve. Tourists can only see it from a boat, but setting foot on the island is strictly prohibited. The next place, however, is inhabited by people, but only a select few are allowed to set foot there. One Hawaiian island is completely closed to outsiders. While Hawaii is known for welcoming tourists, there's one island where no visitors are allowed. Niihau, also called the Forbidden Island. Since 1864, Niihau has been privately owned by the Robinson family, and they've kept it off-limits to the public ever since. Only about 170 residents live there, and their primary language is Hawaiian. There are no stores, no paved roads, no electricity grid. The only connection to the outside world is a radio station and occasional boat trips. The only people allowed to visit are family members, the military, and invited guests. But it's not just private lands that hide secrets. Some places may seem open to the public, but are actually inaccessible to most people. Look at this satellite map. You can barely see anything, as if there's nothing there. But this land is far from empty. This is the most secretive place in the US. Here you'll find secret military test sites, research centers, and of course, Area 51, the undisputed champion of modern myths and conspiracy theories. And all of this is in one state. Nearly 85% of Nevada is owned by the federal government, and large portions of it are completely off-limits to the public. This is where nuclear weapons were tested and aircraft prototypes were developed. Even satellite images of these areas may be deliberately altered to hide important details or even create the illusion that there's nothing there at all. So what are they hiding? Alien technology? Invisible aircraft prototypes? Or something else that we can't even begin to imagine? One thing is certain: Nevada guards its secrets better than any other state.